When Kathleen Sheehy, Superintendent Connolly, Headmaster Deb Holman, Ed Weiser, and 4 of my bio colleagues walked in to announce that I had won this award, I nearly fainted. I was stunned, shocked, you might say in a word, mortified. I turned gray. My students thought I was upset. Well, actually, I was. To be perfectly honest, I see myself as an ordinary teacher who works with a lot of extraordinary colleagues, published authors, poets, choreographers, artists, musicians, travel guide writers, boxers, and believe it or not, even a bicycle racer. But here I am, and here's a small part of my story. I grew up in Ohio, and for those of you who don't know where that is, you just head west, and when you get to a 4-way stop, you're gonna know you're in Ohio, because all the other people are gonna say, no, you go first, no, go ahead, no, go. It takes 10 minutes to get through a 4-way stop, because they're all so darn polite. I grew up in a very small town called Blacklick, Ohio. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Surrounded by farms and fields and woods where we played free of adult supervision. It was wonderful. Playing rodeo on Buddy the Pony, having mud ball fights, Tommy Copeland, who used to put rocks in his. I had a scar for years to prove it. Building forts in the woods. The notion of nature deficit disorder was not a part of our vocabulary. But believe it or not, school was actually one of my favorite places to be when I was a kid. In fact, I loved school so much that I used to play school during summer vacations. How weird is that? Downstairs in the basement when it got too hot in the afternoon to play outdoors. My friends and I would go downstairs, and my dad had bought us a set of those old wooden desks, you know, the kind that have the groove carved out for your pencils. Some of you are looking really puzzled. They're hooked together with a cast iron frame, and you can imagine who was usually the teacher. I loved school so much that every day as soon as I got home from school, I would sit down at the dining room table, organize all my books and notebooks in front of me, and I'd sit down and do my work. I couldn't let myself go out and play until I'd finished my homework, and if I made even a single mistake, I'd crumple up my paper and start all over again. I was neurotic. I think one of the reasons that I loved school so much was that I loved my teachers, and I really believed that my teachers loved me. And I especially loved my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Ball. She was tall, she was strict, sometimes very, but she was fair. I reached the pinnacle of my academic success that year. That year, I earned all A's and 1 B in math. Josh, you might need to tutor me. I cried over that B. I even went back to my papers and tried to figure out where I went wrong. I really wanted to be Mrs. Ball's star pupil. Mrs. Ball understood me. I was painfully shy. I know it's hard to believe right now. And speaking in front of my class was quite literally frightening. I would beg her not to make me give my book report to the class, but she'd always make me try. And then after several minutes of stammering and stuttering and nervous giggling, she'd let me turn around, give my book report to the blackboard with my back facing the class. I loved being in her room, surrounded by so many books and things to learn. But one day something happened, and I don't remember any of the events beforehand. But Ladrine Scott, a girl in my class, stood up and cried out to Mrs. Ball, "You don't like me just because I'm colored," and then ran crying out of the room. Mrs. Ball was right behind her. We could hear them in the hallway talking. I don't know what happened next. I suppose Ladrine got sent to the nurse or maybe the principal's office. But after that, I started thinking about how she must have felt being the only African-American kid in our class. You see, Ladrine and I rode the same bus to school every day. We went to the same school. We had the same facilities. We used the same textbooks. We had access to the same school library with those same scary librarians. And we had the same teachers. But we didn't have the same experience. I knew that Mrs. Ball loved me. I knew that Mrs. Ball valued me. But I doubt that Ladrine felt very loved or valued by Mrs. Ball. I think a lot about that story about Ladrine and Mrs. Ball. That was 1965, more than 50 years ago. Race has been a major part of our conversations this year at Brookline High. It's not easy. It's emotionally charged, but it's important work to do. Sometimes we do it together in groups, small committees, sometimes in whole school assemblies, sometimes one-on-one. And all of those things are good. It gets us thinking. But the most important work is the silent conversations that we have within ourselves. So what are the questions that I still have? How do we make every student feel valued, especially as our workload and class sizes increase? 12 years ago, I had a student in my sophomore Biology 1 honor class. You've already heard about him. He was a bit short, so now you've heard what he's doing now. He was a bit short, he was a little pudgy, he was definitely quirky. He usually sat in the back row of my classroom balancing a textbook on his head. He was actually known to have annoyed one or two of his teachers. And he wasn't earning an A in my class. Now that didn't seem to bother him at all. It wasn't important to him. But it did concern his parents. So they arranged a meeting with me early one morning before school. I started the meeting. Aaron, I said, could easily earn an A in this class if he just spent more time studying for tests. He spends so much time writing these lab reports, beautifully written, references cited, some from professional journals, no less, data graphed, carefully analyzed, or at least as carefully analyzed as any high school lab could be. His lab reports were 8 to 10 pages long. I had to grade them. Publishable quality. And I looked at his parents and I said, they're worth 25% of his grade. His tests are 65%. The math is easy. And his parents respectfully and patiently listened to me, and then they said this, but this is his passion. Their son, they told me, wanted to be a scientist. Now, Aaron acknowledged it was important to learn the fundamentals of biology, but he also knew the skills he needed to be a scientist. Aaron seized his own path. He never took all honor and the requisite 3 AP classes to get into an Ivy League school. Instead of AP Spanish, he took Spanish 4 and film because he believed that making videos would be important to his future career as a behavioral primatologist. He took Bio 2 honor instead of an AP Science class because he wanted the opportunity to delve deeper into topics of his choice. I wrote his college recommendation. I didn't write about a student who earned respectable grades in my class. I wrote about a student who found the joy of learning, who understood the purpose of education, who gave value to his education. He didn't see high school as an admission ticket to the right college. He saw it as an opportunity to develop skills, learn enough stuff, and most of all, to follow his passion. He did get into an Ivy League school, and he did find his dream hiking through the forest of Uganda following chimpanzees, and he's still hypothesizing about why we humans lost our hair. Today, he's finishing a PhD in anthropology at the University of Michigan. So Ladrine and Aaron. Ladrine, a 10-year-old black girl from a small town in Ohio in 1965, who had the courage to stand up to her teacher and essentially tell her that she didn't feel valued. Aaron, a white kid in suburbia Boston, bucked the system to chart his own path, thereby creating value of his own. What I learned from these two students, who had very different stories is that we need to hear kids. We need to hear their stories to make them feel loved and valued. So what are the questions I still have? What do we value in education? Before I became a teacher, I worked in research, and what I remember most about that experience is that no matter how hard one tried to control all the variables in an experimental procedure, that data collected from organisms, or even a single cell line where all the cells are supposedly uniform, that there was still variability. I see that same parallel in our students. They are not uniform. They are messy. Or as a former headmaster used to say, they're yeasty. And yet, we have spent countless hours and an awful lot of money categorizing them into advanced, proficient, needs improvement, or failure. As we become more and more obsessed with standardized tests and focus more and more on collecting data, I worry that we'll get lost in the debate over the theoretical rationale behind the use of that data, and lose sight of the fact that those of us in the classroom are living in the flesh and blood world of working with children, living, breathing human beings. Students who are variable, and yet we're expected to mold them into some uniform standard when the single most important trait about them is their variability. I wonder, could all of our data collection be a pretense of equity and fairness, where we try so hard to quantify fairness and equity that there's no room to find the idiosyncratic ways of reaching a student? The past few years, I've had a unique opportunity to collaborate with Donna Sartanowitz, a visual arts teacher, in the creation of a new course, Drawing for Understanding in Field Science. Thank you, 21st Century Fund, for your very generous support, and also to the Brookline Education Foundation. Art and science are fundamentally alike. Yet our approaches to teaching them couldn't be more different. I've learned many things in my collaboration with Donna, one of which is that creativity in a good public school should never be considered a luxury or an elective. It's a necessity. I've never seen students feel as proud about a grade on a test as I have when students finished a tree portrait study or a visual mnemonic of birds, a product that they've created. And oddly enough, I don't ever recall seeing a student coming out of an MCAS test beaming with pride. You should have seen them today. None of them looked too happy. And by the way, just a little bit of good news here. I just learned that the Senate, this is like breaking news, I can't believe this ever happened, actually passed an act that recognizes that arts should be a part of the core curriculum, that they are worried. They are worried that No Child Left Behind, now reincarnated as Every Student Succeeds Act, is narrowing our curriculum and squeezing out the arts. So there you go, arts. So in conclusion, when I was in high school, way back in 1973, my best friend's mom was working on her master's degree in education. And for part of her thesis, she interviewed us as teenagers, I know it's hard to imagine, about our thoughts and experiences in education. And one thing I remember most about those interviews was watching her interview us. How fascinated she was with what we had to say. And then I understood. Teenagers are fascinating. They have one foot in childhood and one foot in adulthood, a perspective they will never have again once they reach adulthood. We work with a fascinating population, and complex. Adolescents are at a crossroads as they learn about the adult world. We should consider this. They'll be here soon. They're going to be our next teachers. And I wonder, will they still accept being rated advanced, proficient, needs improvement, or failure? I am truly honored to have been given this award, the Caverly. It's an award that embodies what we value most about teaching, that teaching and learning are about all of our stories, about finding our passions and experiencing the joy in learning. And it's not about fitting into advanced, proficient, needs improvement, or failure. Thank you.